So good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be just briefly introducing the work that we have been doing as part of this, archival exploration. And and then Shaunadeep will be taking over, going through the details of the various accounts and records that we have gathered and how we have analyzed that data. So in this presentation, we have tried to showcase whatever data or whatever information we have on social resilience in the Delta. And the, uh, I think we'll start with the work at the West Bengal State Archives. Here, this is actually the state-funded organization, and here it is the repository of colonial climate-related data from the Lower Gangetic Delta. And here we actually found a lot of information regarding daily interactions and communications and about the spaces where these interactions occurred. So a lot of cultural context was also specified, which Shaunadeep will actually elaborate in detail. But a lot of this information we had actually gathered during the we had an idea, we had an inkling of where this information could be found because we were working on the EQUIP project of that basically worked on flood governance or fluid governance. And in this project, because it was focused on understanding the flood resilience paradigm in the Sundarbans from a historical perspective, so we had an idea of which documents or which departments we could actually start beginning. We could begin with to look after and then slowly, go through all of them in more detail. And so we started with identifying the information about floods and cyclones that were occurring in Sundarbans and what were the relief measures that were taken to tackle those situations. What was the planning behind this management? Was there any pre-risk preparations or preparedness that was done, and whether there was any kind of connectedness to this historical practices to the current practices that we see regarding risk management in the Sundarbans. And to get this information, we had to go through the indexing method of the West Bengal State Archives. The method itself is a complex mechanism because majority of the data you have to obtain through manual handling. Only, I think, very data from a very few decades are actually, that have been digitized. So all data has they have a consolidated index where all yearly records of different departments have been kept in a different categorization, something that people who have been working in the archives only they are very well adjusted to. But for us it was difficult in the beginning because it was kept in a haphazard manner and we had to go through like hundreds of records to actually identify which were important to us. And and a lot of the records in archives we actually had to collaborate with a lot of the secondary sources, something that Shorudeep has very kindly gone through because he has also worked in the previous project. So, and he went through a lot of the literature surrounding Sundarban, so the types of risks that were prevailing in the region, and what were written about them by the colonial officers and all. And the data that Shorudeep had actually compiled, we could actually corroborate them with the data we found in the archives, whether it was from primary reports, primary correspondences, and maps. Like this map you see of Sundarban, this is an 1873 map by James Ellison, who was a surveyor of Sundarban at that point of time. And so these are like some of the graphical records and the textual records that we got. We got it from the agriculture department, the revenue department, and there is the general miscellaneous department as well. So as we went through these departments, I think we realized that we needed to separate and then integrate the record solely based on Sundarban's risks into our own repository that we had to prepare for this, ENGAGE project. And this is something that we created. We created the SR4D archival Google Drive, where we actually put in a targeted index list. So we went through all the records, in the West Bengal State Archives. We separated the data solely specific to Sundarban, and then we put into the archival G drive. So as an example, I can show you what Shaunadeep did. So on the left, you see this is like a record room copy of the Judicial Department of the 1898 year. So there are records like this from, for example, I can say from like 1859 to 1889 consecutively. And there are hundreds of proceedings within this particular record, but within this only few are actually they are reference to Sundarbans. So this is something that we put into the Excel sheet. So in the Excel sheet, you will see that we actually tried to, we have highlighted the data that is related to Sundarbans. And so in this way, so we have categorized the data for different departments as well. So here only the proceedings that are relevant to Sundarbans, climate occurrences are actually being done. And this is only like one page. Here you will see, so like we created separate folders for the different departments, whether it was revenue, agriculture, finance, general miscellaneous, and we completely copied the relevant information regarding Sundarbans that were categorized, monthly into these different Word documents. So each of these Word documents, so when you open the G Drive file, you will notice the different department folders. When you click onto the department folders, each department will show you the monthly recordings of what information regarding Sundarban is present in those particular departments. So this is like our own, SOR4D targeted archive. And here you will find, we found that most of the information related to the risk are in the branch of agricultural department. Here, a lot of cyclones and floods topics are present, and which is shown to be the primary risk in the Sundarbans era. But at the same time, it also gives information about the post-climate disasters, such as health risks like cholera, malaria, and dysentery that were plaguing the region at that point of time. So we get a very layered idea of what risk was and how it was perceived and how it was actually coped with during this particular time. But there were challenges as well, such as the B index of the archives department. We have kept a list of the B index proceedings, but because basically these are the proceedings that are completely damaged or they have been destroyed. And unfortunately, many of the documents, very relevant documents, we could understand from the titles, from the preceding titles, were relevant to Sundarbans had been destroyed. So, but we had to work with what we could actually have. In this here, so Shaunadeep actually tried to classify the kind of documents that were present on disasters into the different, departments, like what this different departments were actually trying to compile about the risks or the disasters. So in the judicial and finance, it was mostly about the data on appointment of officials and the kind of grants that were sanctioned for, post like health risk expenditures. The revenue departments, whether it was agriculture or land, it talked about relief operations and loss of mortality, fiscal loss. And there are separate general miscellaneous departments actually mostly talked about the construction works of embankment, ponds, etc. So this is something that Shaunadeep did, completely by himself, because he was working in detail with here. And here, while working, we could actually identify the different kinds of risks that were being mapped by the colonists. But at the same time, there is a layered story to this, because we could see the colonial perspective of place at this point of time was completely homogenized. The islands, the different, whether it was the topographical, the social, or the cultural diversities were not acknowledged at all. And the indigenous population was completely dominant by the colonists and their policies and their practices. And so the local communities had actually become passive spectators. And instead of perceiving the floods and cyclones as like habituated risk, they were seen as more like a loss to the fiscal commerce and all. And this is something that affected the governance structure and their preparation of disaster policies as well. And this led to and this is where actually we realized that the colonists had developed a different framework for adapting resilience in the delta. And this is something that I think Shaunodip will be better able to explain.
Yeah. Am I audible, Shoshiti?
Yes, yes, you're right.
Yeah, yeah. So while we were going through the data, the records, what we found is that there is a structure or a pattern towards addressing the problems the islanders were facing at that time. So based on that, we tried to give it a structure, and we tried to divide the whole idea of managing risks into two broader heads. One is immediate, and another one is long term. So, in the immediate risk, which can be denoted as something which is an immediate reaction to the risk which was done by the colonial administration. It was not really something which they were doing to solve the problem, but rather than address the immediate issue that was happening in the islands. So we have divided the immediate into three subparts. One is local, the second one is medical, and the third one is institutional. Shoshiti, can you take to the next slide, please? Yeah. So in the institutional part, which is the first step towards addressing the other two subcategories of risk management, the whole content of institutional risk management comprises of the allocation of funds, the allocation of people, and appointments of officers and native civil servants, native practitioners into the islands where the administration cannot reach. And it comprises of different tables within the records where they have done a budgeting of the amount of money which needs to be spent in different categories of materials which needs to be supplied within the population. So here we can see a table from the district of Bakirganj during the cyclone of 1876, which talks about the different kinds of supplies which needs to be given to the native population. So here is like the amount of rice, the gunny bags, dal, and different other necessary materials which was supplied. And I have to also say that you can see that there are 25 mons of salt which was provided, and it's very interesting to note because there are records which shows that people who were affected the by the disasters, they did not have anything to eat. So mostly they relied on the plants or the shrubs which grows beside their home, and they used to boil them along with salt to have a taste. And also there are similar records where they suggest that rice and salt was like a daily food for them during this time. And these comprises of the institutional part of the risk management. And then comes the local initiatives such as the repairs or the works which were down on the grassroots level, when they finally get the fund to do something, and they go to the islands to address the issues. So it comprises of the relief distribution mostly, and giving it to the population, and repairing the embankments, the bunds to protect the fields from the river water. Now the idea of repairment has got its long term effects as well, but the whole idea of repairment comes just after the calamity occurs. So we have put it in the immediate strategies, because though the idea of having embankments and bunds have got long term effect, the initiative was taken just after the cyclone occurred. So we have kept it in the local initiatives in the immediate risk management strategies. And the third one is medical assistance, which includes the appointment of doctors, medical professionals, and supply of medicines into the different islands. And the record shows that a great deal of these appointments was done to get the native doctors into the islands. And the administration of the British government did not supply their own medical professionals. They tried to hire someone who is from local population, and they tried to put them in the situation in the islands to give medical assistance. And there was also records which shows that money was funded to set up dispensaries in different islands, and supply of medicines was also done in order to cater to the needs of the people. And third one, which is very important to understand, is that the removal of bodies. So after the cyclone occurred, a great deal of accounts have been given to cholera and malaria, and at the aftermath of cyclone. So these two epidemics, they caused a huge amount of mortality, almost more than what people were dying during the cyclone. People were dying more after the cyclone as well. So the local population, a certain caste who lives in Bengal, and their sole job was to take remove the bodies from the fields under tracks, and no other group of people or people belonging from other castes will do that job. So a great deal of accounts have been given to these people whose main idea or whose main job was to remove the bodies from the tracks. And the mortality rates, as I said, that it was very high. But while going through the initiatives on the risk management strategies, what we find that it was not linear in nature, and there were certain subparts and layers to it as well. So, Srishri, can we get to the next slide, please? Yes. So while we were going through the immediate strategies and the local initiatives, what we found that there was a great deal of records which shows the contribution of native zamindars in the flood and relief distribution. It was shown that the zamindars of Bengal and from all over India, there were funds collected and given to the British government to meet the risk the risk and the problems which have occurred in parts of Sundarbans. And there are also data which suggests that the Parsi community of Bombay, they put a lot of money into the relief distribution and the whole idea of taking care of people. So, but the whole problem lies in the fact that there are no enough data which suggests that the aid which was given by the locals or the money which was provided by the zamindars, are they for the benefit of the population or the benefit of the citizen who lives under their constituency, or it was a way of being on the good books of the British government, or getting some relief or revenue benefits. Because in the records there are a lot of records which proceedings which shows that suspension of tax and revenue was something which was very common just after the cyclone, because of the uh, destruction which has been caused in certain tracts and agricultural fields. And there are other two parts which needs to be discussed. The one is caste based relief distribution, and second is religious occasion relief. Caste based relief distribution is in one of the records we see that there are proceedings which talks about upper caste person, upper caste civil servant who is not giving enough caste relief to the lower caste people who are present in the islands. And then there is a particular proceeding written by Jodunath Chakraborty, who is a civil servant, a native civil servant. He writes to the collector where he says that there is a great deal of destruction which has been caused. But on the next proceeding, when the collector writes back to his subordinates, he writes that he has got information where the native civil servant is being discriminatory in terms of distribution relief, and it was not specified the discrimination of what basis. But there are other records which shows that there were caste based relief distribution happening in some of the islands. The third one is religious occasion relief. It is one of the most interesting records I have come through so far in the archives. Which there is this particular section in the records where the district collector writes to his sub magistrate, where he mentions that if we can hold the whole relief distribution and the funds for another 2 to 3 months, or maybe less, 1 or 2 months, then we will save a great deal of money. So when the sub district magistrate writes that why do you think so, he mentions that in the next 1 or 2 months there will be Durga Puja celebrated all over the islands, and he writes quote in quotes that during this time native zamindars not only open their hearts but also pockets for their native population. So in during this tenure, the zamindar will provide them food and the other necessity materials which are needed, and this will save a lot of money for the administration, which in either case they had to provide for the native population. uh, and then comes the immediate strategies, Shashiji. Yeah, then comes the long-term strategies, which has been divided into two parts. First one is the prediction model, and the third one is experimentation. Second one is experimentations. The prediction model suggests the meteorological departments, which was happening during that time in the Bay of Bengal and uh, port areas basically. And as Sundarban lies in a Bay of Bengal delta, it automatically becomes a important part of the meteorological departments and the developments. So there were a lot of investments which was happening to install machines which was important to understand the weather and predict the weather, so that the yeah so in this chart the picture which has been provided shows that there are different districts, and they have been divided on months basis, and it shows the average rainfall which was happening into those districts. And what we understood was that the whole meteorological department and the prediction model based upon the trade and commerce rather than the safety of the population who was living in those parts, because the destruction was happening all the way even after the meteorological departments developments. But in terms of trade and commerce, uh, they had to install these machineries to take care of the damage and the loss they were facing due to the cyclone. And experimentation part suggests that there were a great deal of a lot of records suggest that there was a great deal of improvement in agricultural societies and colleges which was formed to do research on the kind of crops or the species of crops which were very lucrative in those parts of West Bengal, the Sundarbans of not just West Bengal but also present Bangladesh. So there were societies developing, the agricultural societies. There were fairs and competitions happening between different parts where people who have done some research are coming to the fairs and competitions and showing their works. And there are also narratives which suggest that cash crop was given a lot of importance. During those time, bamboo was a very lucrative uh, cash crop, which was uh, highly in demand. So there are records which suggest the colonial administration, they had to bring the certain kind of bamboo species from outside, if I'm not wrong, Germany, to do some research and understand the climate and the conditions of Bengal, and if they can uh, do the same thing over here and on a lot of money. And people were encouraged to do this kind of trade and this kind of agricultural practices, so that the lot of tax and revenues can be earned from them. Yeah. Yeah. So here comes the challenges which we faced while doing the whole archival process. So first one comes Sundarbans as a landmass redefined borders. So the initial problem, as I was not very familiar with the nitty gritties of Sundarbans of India and Bangladesh, and I was not aware of the each and every island which was there. So the initial problem I faced was with the spelling which was given in the colonial records. So every record we find a different spelling of the I, same island or the same Upozila. It was noted in the colonial records. So here is an example of Hati Islands and Noakhali. And he in throughout the records we find different spellings of Hathi Islands and Noakhali. So initially I thought that there can be a possibility that there are two different places or somewhere close by, which may or may not be the part of Sundarbans. But while going through the records, we found that the narratives which are of the both spellings are very similar to each other. The both places are almost same, and the civil servants who are appointed are also same, which made us understand that it's a same place of but the spellings are different. So that was a thing. And in the colonial records, no particular heading was given as Sundarbans. So Sundarban was not a defined landmass as such. So the map which Sreyoshidi has provided, it is a new initiative which is taken by the government, that they have they have put the map through technological advancement. They have put a map in such a way that we can understand even the riverine tracts of Sundarbans which were there at that time, and it's a very detailed map, which made us understand that during that time, Kolkata and adjoining parts, which right now are not a part of Sundarban, was also a part of Sundarban. But the records, the cyclone records, the risk records, which were given in the colonial proceedings, they were together clubbed into one. So we had to jot down, or we had to divide the whole record into different parts, and take the relevant areas which we were studying. And there is another example of Bakirganj, which is one of the sub districts of Dhaka, and it is southernmost part of Dhaka. But the problem with Bakirganj, what we faced was that in within Dhaka, there are parts where the effect of cyclone was not as grave as Bakirganj. But in Bakirganj, the cyclone had devastating effects. But they were all a part of the Dhaka district. So we had to divide the whole Dhaka district into sub parts, where we have to take out the Bakirganj part and put it in the relevant documents and leave out the rest. So in the index, you saw that there are certain topics which were made yellow while others were kept blank. Because there is a reason to it, is that while going through the documents, many a times we found that the documents are not relevant, because the area which the cyclone is talking about, or the effects, is not the or not the area which we are concerned about. So we had to leave that to itself. So, and after we were going through this issue, what we did was that we put keywords and we tried to search through them, like inundations, relief, affected tracts. Then there are other cyclones and distress. So such keywords made us look into the relevant topics which we want to note or document. And also we try to see the rivers which they are concerned. Like there are records which talks about the parts, but also the river which passes by, like Meghna or Matla, which are one of the most important rivers in those areas, and we had to take them into account because of that. And then comes the technical challenges, which you can see in the picture, that it's a tone up. But the issue is that the records which you are saying, the tone of one is one of the records which is in a good condition in the archives. So this is not even like close to what we went through, because literally the pages were around, like, divided into torn up parts and small parts, which we had to somehow join and try to figure out what they were saying. And the whole system, or the archival, the the West Bengal State Archives, it's kind of underfunded, and the people who work in there, the staffs, they are understaffed. So if you have a certain kind of restriction towards how many records you can take at one time, and how many records you can see in a day. And there is a time limit to it as well. Like before 2 o'clock, you have to submit the requisition slips of certain records which are in the B index, because B index is almost destroyed. There are very few records which are present from the B index, and we have to and it takes a great deal of time to find out that relevant record which are present in the archives. So we have to submit it in a certain time. And then what we found was that in the archives there is a huge problem which I faced was in the index pages there were a lot of index which was after 1900s. Like 50% of the index, the topics which are after 1900s. But when I started looking into the records of that index, what I found that was that almost 95% of the data from after 1900 are almost like nil. So they have either been destroyed or they just don't exist somehow. So we did not understand why it was the case, but we found that there was no data which was present after, like most of the relevant data which we took was from 19th century, like mid 19th century to the end of 19th century. From 20th century you have almost nothing from the archives. And then the third challenge which we faced was there was a one voice. So the records mostly, like almost everyone comprises of letters and correspondence or the conversations which the civil servants had between themselves. And we have to understand the whole space of Sundarban through the eyes of the civil servants themselves. So there was no first person records of the communities who were living there. It was mostly of the civil servants, the sub magistrate or the lower civil servants who were employed in the particular islands or the areas. They write to the district collector that there have been this problem or this risk happening in this part of the island. And then in the next proceeding, the civil servant, the district collector, writes back that these are the amounts of fund which has been allocated for you. You have to do this and you have to do that. But there are no indigenous documentation or the traditional perspective which was available in the records. So yeah, so then the third one is also resilience mapping, which is an extension of the third point which I said, the fourth challenge. That is, the colonial narratives are mostly confined within the technical aspect of a risk management or a risk or a government proceedings, which comprises of data which are numerical literally, and which does not talk about the daily crisis which was faced by people living in those parts. And these four were the main challenges which we faced while going through the records. Then, Srioshri, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So, as I said, that there were a lack of indigenous perspective, but while going through the records, we found small snippets, few of them which talks about the indigenous population or the people who are living there. So, the first one is there was uh, a person, Bhopal Chandra Basu, whose designation was not given in the record, but he talks about irrigation system which was very popular in parts of Bihar and Jharkhand, which was known as Ahora system of irrigation. And he says that in the Cambridgeshire and Yorkshire, these practices have been followed, but in our country, these practices were much before. They were followed much before than the colonial administration or the in Yorkshire or Cambridgeshire. And he says that the same practice, if we can bring it to Bengal, where the idea would be to 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 use the water and to use the water for the irrigation purposes and do canals in order to take care of the water scarcity or the drainage system in the irrigation. It can be of profitable for the farmers who are living here. And then the second one comes to account between EJ Barton, the magistrate of Bakirganj, and Jodunath Chaudhuri, who was the officiating magistrate. And Jodunath Chaudhuri, as I mentioned earlier, he is a lower rank civil servant who writes to the magistrate that the condition here is something which can only be felt but not described. And EJ Button, and there's a long conversation between the two about how many deaths have occurred. And there are horrific narratives about a brother cooking food just beside where his sister or brother is lying dead. And this was the condition of uh, of survival which was happening in those areas during those time after the cyclone or during cholera or malaria. And then there is this third account of J.C. Geddes, collector, Chittagong, who says that who is basically account of two zamindars, two native zamindars, and the argument which they were having between themselves. And what he talks about is that there are two zamindars, and one embankment and band has been destroyed due to the flood. And there is an argument which is going on between the two zamindars, where they are deciding that under whose territory this band or this embankment falls. And and who will pay for the repairment of it, because they have a argument. And the collector tries to intervene and talks about the whole crisis which has happened. And which brings us to something which we discussed earlier about the politics of relief distribution, where the zamindars were providing money, but we could not understand that was it the money which they were providing, was it for the aid for the people or the benefit of the people, or they were trying to get some benefits from the colonial administration. And next comes the nature state society. So this is a legislative account which I got a judicial judgment which was given by a native judge, and the case was very interesting. So there were fishermen who were in the Kali River, and they were catching fishes. And the port canning company, they filed a case against this fisherman, saying that this water body is something which we own, and this is a private property, and you cannot fish over here. So the on the defendant side, the fisherman says that they further allege that they have been in uninterrupted enjoyment of this right for generations together, and that no rent was ever demanded of them by the prosecutor or by anybody else. So what the fisherman is saying, that this is a land which we have enjoyed for a lot of time, and we have dwelt in it for a lot of time doing fishing and a lot of other activities, but it was never a part of private property, and we were never asked for any kind of tax. So how can this area which were enjoyed by all of us for a long time suddenly becomes a part of private property? And this historic judgment actually was given against the canning company who was there, and it allowed the local fishermen to local population to fish in the channels of river Kalindi and other parts of Sundarbans, where they can earn a living out of it. And yeah, so yeah, Shashri, can we go back to the light slide, please? Yeah. So while going through the records in the concluding part, I would like to uh, talk about 4 points which we found very relevant to the records, or the four, I should say, the outlook we had. The first one is lack of traditional socio-ecological connections. So, as I mentioned earlier, that the colonial narratives are full of official correspondences and communication on the narratives which was happening between two civil servants, rather than the people or the population who are living in that region. There are almost nil or none records which suggest or brings out the perspective of the local population who were actually in the forefront of the disaster, and they were facing the problems primarily. And the next one is extractive policy reform. So the the objective or the colonial idea of risk management, it was mostly based on the idea of administration and control, rather than looking after the population and preparing them to face the disaster as such. So the colonial records itself talks about how to maintain the administration, and due to the risk which was happening, there are lot of dacoits and thieves or loots which were happening in certain parts and how they have to dealt with it, and how they have employed police personals and others in those islands in order to restore the order there. The third one is imperial science of disaster management versus traditional adaptive knowledge. So, as we were talking about the risk management, what we found that there was the whole idea of managing risks was very imperial in nature, and they did not take into account the traditional adaptive knowledge the population had within themselves. The economic consequences of the disaster was given more importance rather than the socio-economic resilience of the native population or the lives of the native population in general. The most of the long term or the strategies, the long term strategies which were taken by the colonial administration was mostly comprising of things which will get them a lot of revenue rather than which will take care of the population as such. And the fourth one is colonial perspective of the single disaster approach rather than uh, a multi multiple way of handling the risks. So the single disaster approach necessarily suggests that the management, the risk management of the colonial administration, it was mostly based on providing relief distribution, immediate reaction to the problem rather than a long-term goal. The immediate reaction is not the immediate reaction was to provide relief materials to the population, but it was not the long term goal. The long term goal would be how to deal with it, how to make the population sustainable, and to take care of the population so that the casualty rate or the mortality rate does not get as high as this time. But they used a same size fits all model. If we go through the records of disasters or the risk which was happening in other parts of India, we will find that the steps which were taken by the colonial administration are same to what they were doing in in the Sundarbans. So it suggests that they don't understand the multiple disruptive risk idea where the management or the strategies must uh, the strategies or the sorry yeah the strategies or which were taken by the colonial administration uh, was something which was based on the social space or the subjective space, but it was based on the model which they have, and they